the notion that government plays a role in encouraging the development of religious freedom in other countries. And he's been with us, as I mentioned, he's spent over 30 years in the Foreign Service. So he's going to bring his perspective on the role that government can play in encouraging religious freedom, and particularly as it applies to China. Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about the topic at hand, namely China and religious freedom, stories and perspectives. I'm happy to share my stories and perspectives relating to China and the struggle for religious freedom, but I'd like to approach the topic from a particular vantage point, one that I think is appropriate to this parliamentary forum, and the only one to which I can claim any expertise. I served in China as Canada's ambassador, so I'd like to talk about what Canada, and specifically the Canadian government, can do to promote religious freedom in China. Let's be clear. There is no debate about the lack of religious freedom in China. Voice. Let's be clear, there's no debate about the lack of religious freedom in China. Its government is tightly controlled by an avowedly atheist party. Humanity is viewed through the prisms of science, economics, and a blood-stained and discredited ideology. Perspectives that exclude the transcendent and that reduce the individual to near invisibility. Of course, China's technocratic leadership suffers from similarly limited vision in other domains, specifically any that insist on seeing our human experience on a canvas broader than the cramped and circumscribed vision of the Communist Party can comprehend. This feeds a deep anxiety in a party that is perpetually insecure about its hold on power. And it goes some way to explaining the party's inclination to repress, punish, and silence those who aspire to a deeper and richer vision of human possibilities. It shouldn't surprise us, for example, that just as China's leaders are deeply fearful of any manifestation of religious belief, so too are they intimidated by thinkers and painters and poets. The artist Ai Weiwei is considered dangerous in large part because he reaches his fellow citizens in ways the party can't. The same is true of the Dalai Lama or of a preacher in a house church in the suburb of some bleak, modern, and sadly entirely soulless Chinese city. I once listened in amazement as China's foreign minister spat out the syllables Fan Di Gang. This man, a senior official in a powerful nuclear-armed state, was expressing his distaste for and fear of a tiny enclave near the center of Rome, the Vatican. But even if we acknowledge that the Chinese state fails to accord religious freedom to its subjects, what can and should Canada do about it? On what basis might we introduce this troubling state of affairs into our official bilateral Canada-China agenda? Well, for one thing, religious freedom is promised under Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that technically binds all UN members, China included. Here's what the article actually says. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Given that Canada is also bound by the Declaration, indeed, Canadian John Peters Humphrey helped to draft it, what can we do to build religious freedom into our larger discussion of human rights with China? As Dr. Bennett's presence on the panel this evening reminds us, we took a very important step forward by creating an Office of Religious Freedom operating under the leadership of an ambassador. I'd like to give you my own perspective from the coalface, working as a Canadian diplomat in China, and specifically as Canada's lead diplomat in China in the months leading up to the creation of Dr. Bennett's office. Let me begin by noting that I was, for my first days as ambassador, keenly interested in religious belief in China. I should be clear that this was of more than theoretical or even professional interest. I'm a Catholic and therefore tend to see faith and belief as natural and necessary shapers of human behavior. I made sure that on my travels I got to spend time with faith groups, and I did have an agenda. I quickly became aware that something as simple as showing up with a message of Canadian concern and support can become, as my colleague, the German ambassador, eloquently put it, like a candle in the dark for people who are otherwise alone and abandoned. I visited many mosques and shared my keen interest in Islamic art, culture, and history with our Chinese followers on social media. I looked and listened carefully as I traveled. I was saddened on my visits to China's far west, home to Muslim Uyghurs, by a clumsy, insensitive, and highly militarized Chinese administration that is almost certain to radicalize the region. After much difficulty, I got to Tibet. There, only after daily battles with my government handlers, whose objective was to make it as difficult for me as possible to see and learn anything, I managed to witness unforgettable and highly moving scenes of faith and belief. Miraculously, these survived despite persistent efforts by the state to constrain belief and believers. On a trip to China's southwest, I slipped quietly into a Protestant house church for a worship service operating outside the control and approval of the party. I sat in a sunny courtyard with men and women from one of China's many minority groups, listening to them sing their hymns and read their Bibles. We were all complicit in an illegal act, daring to worship in something other than a space designated by the state. But we were also enjoying the freedom granted us by the Universal Declaration, which speaks of worship as having a private as well as a public dimension. And not surprisingly, I took a keen interest in Catholic affairs. I followed carefully the case of a seminary whose students had courageously gone on strike, refusing to submit to the imposition of a Communist Party plant as their rector, the boss of the seminary. It worked. The party act was replaced. I asked to visit the seminary, and the new rector graciously agreed. But he asked that I also obtain permission from the authorities so as to protect the seminary from any reprisals. I did so and found, on my arrival at the train station in the city where the seminary is located, a finger-wagging junior official who harangued me in public for seeking to visit. He also informed me of an urgent meeting with senior local officials, one that would make my seminary visit all but impossible. I insisted on seeing the seminary, and ended up conducting my now abbreviated tour and meeting with the rector and seminarians at a jogging pace. We literally ran through the seminary talking. I can honestly say that the meeting left me breathless. The urgent official meeting turned out to be a hollow courtesy call, a complete fabrication. At the heart of my experience with religion in China was the opportunity to join with Catholic volunteers in the Canadian Embassy to organize Mass each Sunday for the international community. I should note that we offered similar support to other faith groups, but by this time, with China bearing down on the Catholic Church once again, it was the Catholic community that felt most under pressure. Each week we would welcome at least 100 friends, men, women, and children from all continents, from South America, from Africa, from Europe, and from Asia. At the great feast of Easter, we would open the doors and seat people in the embassy gardens as 200 or more would gather. The parish, Our Lady of China, was very active in providing funds to sheltered pregnant women who feared coerced abortions, and in reaching out to the abandoned elderly and patients afflicted with HIV/AIDS. Throughout this period, I encouraged staff to begin thinking of ideas to pitch to the soon-to-be-established Office of Religious Freedom. These were not long in coming. Our list included projects involving Buddhist, Protestant, and Catholic groups. Towards the end of my tenure, I traveled to Tashkogan, about as far west as you can go in China, to meet with the Ismaili Muslim community there. One of my last acts as ambassador was to pitch the idea that Canada might be able to play a role in offering higher education to young people from this community, who are otherwise cut off from the wider world, including the wider Ismaili diaspora. There is rich scope for supporting projects that provide material and educational support to religious organizations and believers in China. Projects that enable them to be what they so often are, lonely agents of charity and hope in an otherwise materialistic society. But as we worked, I also noticed something else. There was considerable skepticism from my colleagues in Ottawa about the need for an Office of Religious Freedom in the first place. I was encountering, and not for the first time, secular discomfort with the very idea that freedom of religion still belongs in the fundamental list of human rights.